I'd like to now warmly welcome again, good morning, Bhante, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, we're so blessed to be able to hear these teachings. It's really quite extraordinary that in this lifetime that we can begin to understand more from such an expert and such an experienced teacher like Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. So without further ado, may I turn it over to Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I just said that I thank you and I thank the Dharma College for hosting this series of talks, monthly series of talks on the Abhidhamma teachings of the Theravada tradition. And we've been going through the comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma, and now we're coming into the home stretch with chapter 8 out of 9 chapters. And this is the chapter on conditionality, dependent origination, and the system of conditions, which is quite distinctive to the Theravada tradition, laid down in the last book of the Abhidhamma, the Pitana. That's what we'll be dealing with tomorrow. Today we'll be dealing with dependent origination. And now, to make it easy for myself and for everybody else, I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so we don't need. And what I want is this. Okay, so this is chapter 8 of the comprehensive manual, the Abhidhamma Sangaha, called in Pali Pachaya Sangaha Vibhaga, which is translated the Compendium of Conditionality. And so the author begins with the introductory verse in which he says that he's going to explain the detailed analysis of the conditioned states and of those states or dhammas that are their conditions, and then how they are related. This will be explaining the different types of conditions. So we have the conditioned dhammas, conditioned states are the sankata dhamma, and the conditions are the pachaya. And so the magnification of the text, is it big enough? Or shall we go up some points?
That would be great. Thank you, Bhante. That's good. Thank you.
Okay, so he has, just going through the guide, he says he's going to explain the analysis of the conditioned states and the conditionally arisen states and the conditions that link them. Those are called the conditioning forces. Okay, so the conditioned states are phenomena that arise in dependence on conditions. And in the Abhidhamma system, this will be 3 out of the 4 kinds of fundamental realities: the chittas, states of mind or consciousness; chaitasikas, the mental factors; and material phenomena. All of these are conditioned phenomena that depend upon conditions. And so what is the meaning of a condition? So the formal definition that we find used again and again in the Pali commentaries to define a condition is a state which is, here I use the word efficacious, or we could use a simpler word, helpful in the arising or persistence of other states. So in other words, a condition is a factor or a state that causes other states that have not yet arisen, causes them to arise. And if those conditioned states have already arisen, the conditioning state is a state that helps to maintain them in existence. So all conditioned phenomena and even nibbana and concepts can be included in the category of conditioning states. So we see that even nibbana can function as a condition. It's a condition, an object condition for the paths and the fruits, though we won't be going into that now. Okay, then how they are related, how the condition is helpful to the arising or maintaining of the conditioned state, that refers to the 24 kinds of conditioning forces that operate between the conditions and the conditioned states. This will be the topic that we'll be dealing with tomorrow. Okay, then in the presentation of the topic of conditionality, there are two methods by which these are treated within the Abhidhamma. One is called the method of dependent arising or dependent origination. In Pali, this is called the Paticca Samuppada Nyo. So Nyo is the method, and Paticca Samuppada is what we call dependent arising, dependent origination. Then the other method that we'll be dealing with tomorrow is the Patthana Nyo, which is the method of conditional relations. This is the system, the way of systematizing the relations between conditioning factors and conditioned factors. So the conditional relations.
Bhante, could I ask you, is it possible you could make your window full screen? You're only showing in half the screen. If you maximize the window, that's it. Then it gets a lot bigger. Thank you so much, Bhante. Maybe even make the font a little bigger now. Make the thing fill the screen a bit. People can't read it.
Okay.
Just zoom a bit. Thank you, Bhante.
Oops. We don't need 6,000 times.
That's probably too much. That's wonderful. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay.
Oh no, we're not full screen. Now if you can make it full screen.
Yeah, yeah. I had lost
Thank you.
Yeah, we don't need to. Is it good now?
That's much better. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so the method of conditional relations deals with what's called the specific causal efficacy or the causal effectiveness of the conditions. Okay, so today we'll be dealing with Paticca Samuppada, dependent origination. And first, the term dependent origination it's a compound of the word paticca and the word samuppada. In grammatical terms, the word paticca is we call this an absolutive, which maybe we don't have to go into Pali grammar. Okay, but we could render it as dependent on or conditioned by. And then the word samuppada is arising or origination. Sometimes I've seen paticca samuppada translated or explained as, how does it go? Dependent co-arising or interdependent co-arising. I think that's incorrect in both respects. First, paticca doesn't imply inter. dependent, but it means simply dependent, one thing relying upon another. It's not necessarily the case that the two things are conditioning each other, though sometimes they are, but not always. And then samuppada does not really mean co-arising, but upada is arising, and the prefix sam intensifies it or maybe contributes some element of complexity into it. So I prefer simply dependent origination. And this is usually applied to a formula of 12 terms that we will be dealing with a little bit later. But then we have, in the Pali, it said that the method of dependent origination, the text uses a rather complex term in Pali, ta bhava bhavi bhav arakara matang. So, which is translated here, it's marked by the simple happening of one state in dependence on some other state. And so in this expression, the first part, tabhava, is that state which refers to the condition, and bhavi means the conditioned state, that which is occurring, and bhava is the aspect or of the happening or the occurrence. So it's the occurrence of the conditioned state in dependence on the occurrence of the condition. And in the suttas, we find there's an abstract principle of dependent origination, which is expressed by a very simple statement, simple to express, but very deep in its implications. So the expression goes in Pali, imasmin sati idang hoti, imasa upada idang upajati. So imasmin sati, this is technically is called a locative absolute, which has the meaning when this exists. Then we have idang hoti, that comes to be. But this could also be rendered, that exists. When this exists, that exists. Or when this exists, that comes to be. So this portion of the formula establishes what might be called a correlation between the condition and the conditionally arisen phenomena. So whenever the conditioned phenomena arises, we find that the condition also exists. When the condition exists, the dependent phenomena arises. But the second part of the formula is somewhat stronger in highlighting the causal nature of the relationship. So here we have the word upada, which grammatically is called an ablative, suggesting that it is through the condition, because of the arising of the condition, that the condition phenomena arises. And so we're going to have this applied to the formula with its 12 terms. And so what the principle means is that when any of the conditions, such as ignorance, exist, then in dependence on those conditions, the conditionally arisen states arise, come to be. So when there's ignorance, then there will be the sankharas, the karmic conditions, and so forth. Okay, then as I already mentioned, the subject we'll be dealing with tomorrow is the method of conditional relations. And as I said, this goes beyond the method of dependent arising, which only deals with the conditioned states and conditioned states and the structure of their arising. But the method of the patana, of conditional relations, deals with the conditioning forces themselves. And so the force is a power. And the word force in Pali is sati, which corresponds to Sanskrit shakti, which in certain tantric systems means like the power or force. So that the force is something with the power to bring about an effect. And so all conditioning states have their particular force, and this force enables them to bring about the arising of the conditioned states. We'll be dealing with this more tomorrow. So I'm going to pass over the rest, and we're going to come now to, first we'll just deal with the formula for dependent origination. And here we have the Pali formula, and then we have a translation. So we have dependent on ignorance arise, and the Pali word is sankhara. Here, this is an old translation. So we have, I think I followed the older edition of this, which had karmic formations. Now I would render this as volitional activities. Yeah, other translators, there's a whole variety of ways of rendering sankhara. I use volitional activities, some use volitional formations, some use fabrications, some use concoctions, some use conformations, whatever. So it's one of those Pali words or Sanskrit sanskara, which is very difficult to find a single English term that renders it precisely. But we could say that sankharas are things that in coordination with other things bring about an effect. And in the context of dependent origination, they are particularly forces that are motivated by or operated by volition. Okay, then dependent on the karmic formations or volitional activities arises consciousness. Then dependent on consciousness arises mind and matter. And here too we have I'm not so happy with this rendering. I just took it over from the earlier translator. But some have used, because mind here can be a little confusing when we have consciousness related to mind. So some have used mentality, materiality, or you could even use name and form, which is a literal rendering, but again, a little misleading if you take it too literally. But we'll catch the sense of it as we go along. Then we have dependent on, let's say, mentality and materiality, arise the 6 sense bases. So the 6 sense bases are the eye, ear, nose, tongue, physical body, and the mind base. Then dependent on the 6 sense bases, we have contact. Dependent on contact arises feeling. Dependent on feeling arises craving. Dependent on craving arises clinging. Then dependent on clinging arises existence. And the use of this word here truly requires explanation, which we will come to. And then dependent on existence arises birth. Dependent on birth arise decay and death, or we could also say old age and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So thus arises this whole mass of dukkha, the unsatisfactory nature, or thus arises this whole cycle of repeated birth and death, which is pervaded by dukkha, the unsatisfactory nature of conditioned existence. So that is the method of dependent arising, dependent origination, which the way I see it, the way the way the tradition sees it, as dependent arising is essentially an account, I call this the causal structure of the round of existence, the round of repeated existence. And it discloses the conditions that sustain the wheel of birth and death, that they call it the underlying dynamics, sort of hidden behind or within the wheel of birth and death, that keep the wheel revolving from one existence to another. And now what I would like to do is to look at some suttas on dependent origination. And this might help us to get maybe some clearer idea, to start to, at least to prepare the way for a more detailed explanation of the 12 factors. So there's one very important sutta in the Digha Nikaya called the Mahanidana Sutta, the translated as the Great Discourse on Causation. And in this sutta, the sutta begins when the Buddha's attendant, Venerable Ananda, comes to the Buddha and says to him that it is wonderful and marvelous how this dependent origination is so deep and appears so deep, yet to me it seems perfectly clear, utterly simple. And then the Buddha reproaches Ananda for that and says, do not say this, Ananda, do not say this. Wow, I'm inconsistent here. I say, this dependent arising, it should be dependent origination, is deep and it appears deep because of not understanding and not penetrating this Dharma, this principle. This population has become like a tangled skein, like a knotted ball of thread, and it's unable to escape from samsara with its plane of misery, bad destinations, and lower realms. So in this beginning of this sutta, the Buddha underscores the depth of dependent origination and its function, its role in the framework of his teaching, that it is by understanding and penetrating dependent origination that one can overcome, escape, get beyond samsara, get free from all possibility of rebirth in the lower realms. Okay, then I brought in a sutta. This is just a simple statement of dependent origination, which we already went through. But the other side of the formula of dependent origination is the formula for cessation. So after speaking about the origin of this whole mass of dukkha, the Buddha then continues and he says, with the fading away and cessation of ignorance, there comes cessation of the volitional formations. With the cessation of volitional formations, cessation of consciousness, name and form, and so forth, till we get with the cessation of birth, then there's the cessation of old age and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair, the cessation of this whole mass of dukkha. Okay, then what I especially wanted to bring out is the sutta which shows how the Buddha discovered dependent origination. And this is in the Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 12, sutta number 10. And so here the Buddha is showing how the discovery of dependent origination marked or opened up for him the path to his own enlightenment. So he says, before my enlightenment, while I was still a bodhisattva, then he reflected. So now he's sitting under the Bodhi tree on the, we call this the site of enlightenment at Bodh Gaya, and he's reflecting that this world has fallen into trouble, in that people are born, they grow old and die, they pass away and they're reborn, but they don't know the escape from the suffering, from old age and death. So he's pondering, how can I find the escape from the suffering of old age and death? Then he decides to use the method of investigation into conditions, into causes and conditions. So the question occurs to him, when what exists does old age and death come to be? What is the underlying condition for old age and death? What is the root? Why do we grow old and die? And the reason, he says, that as he was reflecting in this way, pondering in this way, thoroughly and carefully, he said, I made a breakthrough with wisdom. I think the Pali goes, Yoniso manasikara ahu panyaya abhisamayo. There was this realization or breakthrough through wisdom that the reason we grow old and die, the reason that we go through all of these sufferings and misery of life, of existence, is because we have been born. So if a doctor is filling out a death certificate, maybe nowadays a medical doctor will write, okay, cause of death, heart failure, cause of death, lung cancer, cause of death, maybe coronavirus, cause of death, kidney failure, cause of death, collision and automobile accident. But that's just, we could call this the adventitious cause of death, the incidental cause of death. But the fundamental cause of death is birth. You were born, and for that reason, if you're going to live a long time, you'll grow old. But even from the time you're born, you're already gradually aging. And once you're born, you inevitably have to die. Okay, so then he's going to start tracking or tracing the chain of conditions further and further. So why does birth take place? What is the condition for birth? And the answer that he comes upon, if we just take it at its surface level, is rather a puzzling, somewhat cryptic, but we'll give the explanation a little later. So when there is existence, there is birth. So the condition for birth is coming into existence. Now, maybe we could put it that way. The condition for birth is establishing the conditions that brought us into existence. Okay, in the next stage, he inquires, what are the conditions that brought us into existence? By what is conditioned existence? Then he comes to the answer, it is clinging that establishes or sets in motion the conditions that bring us into existence. So the condition for existence is clinging. And then he goes back, step by step through craving, then coming back to name and form. This is nama rupa, then to consciousness, then from consciousness to the volitional formations, karmic activities, karmic formations. Then finally, he asks, what is the condition for the karmic formations, the volitional formations? And the condition is ignorance. And then he goes through, after coming to ignorance as the most fundamental condition, he goes through the whole series in direct order from ignorance all the ways to old age and death. And then comes the realization, he says, origination, origination. Thus, in regard to things unheard before, there arose in me vision, knowledge, wisdom, true knowledge, and light. So the discovery of dependent origination brought forth this knowledge, wisdom, and light. And then in the next phase, he goes through the series on cessation. And then again at the end, he says, in regard to sensation, there arose in me vision, knowledge, wisdom, true knowledge, and light. And then there's another sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. This is chapter 12, number 65, which starts off in the same way. And it tracks the series down to consciousness as the condition for name and form. But in this case, the question occurs to him, when what exists, does consciousness come to be? By what is consciousness conditioned? And here, rather than take consciousness back to the sankharas, to the volitional formations, he traces consciousness to name and form. So consciousness has name and form as its condition. So here we have only 10 factors in the series. Name and form, or mentality, materiality conditioned by consciousness, and consciousness conditioned by name and form, by nama rupa, mentality, materiality. So then it occurs to him, this consciousness turns back. It does not go beyond name and form. So it is in this way that one is born, grows old, and dies, passes away, and takes rebirth. That is, when there is consciousness with name and form as its condition, and name and form with consciousness as its condition. So this has sometimes been called the vicious vortex, the whirlpool, by which consciousness conditions name and name and form in turn conditions consciousness. So that's a special variant on the formula of dependent origination. But the usual way, the standard way, is with 12 factors. It's not that the two are contradictory, but it's just presenting the same process from somewhat different angles, different perspectives. Okay, let us go back to the comprehensive manual. Okay, first, before I go through the series, I have to say, make a certain comment as a kind of preface to what I'm going to go through. The Theravada tradition, as we're going to see in more detail later, distinguishes the 12 factors by way of 3 lifetimes. It divides the 12 factors, or assigns the 12 factors, into 3 lifetimes. And that has been part of the Theravada tradition from probably we could go in the suttas themselves. We don't find what I would call a detailed, systematic explanation of how the 12 factors operate together. And so it's open to various interpretations. And the method of explanation that has come down in the Theravada tradition, going past the time of going further back beyond the time of the Visuddhimagga and the commentaries, we find the roots of this already in the canonical Theravada and Abhidhamma and some early exegetical texts. There's a present day fashion that seems to be accelerating of modern commentators rejecting the 3 life interpretation, sometimes saying it's unsatisfactory, it's nonsense, it's incomprehensible, it's self-contradictory, and so on, and then developing various alternative interpretations, usually trying to show how the 12 links operate in a single lifetime. Yeah, to satisfy my own doubts about that, I happen to be able to read Buddhist Chinese to some extent. I checked the Abhidhamma system of another early school, the Sarvastivada school, and found they too present a 3 life interpretation, maybe different in some details from the Theravada tradition, but basic principles of explanation the same. The Sarvastivada school flourished in what's now Kashmir region. Then I got another Abhidhamma system preserved in Chinese translation. The Dhammaguptaka school has its Abhidhamma treatise called the Sariputra Abhidhamma Shastra, the treatise on Abhidhamma by Sariputta, also preserved in Chinese translation. I read more or less that Abhidhamma track on dependent origination, also 3 life interpretation. And if you look at Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, I think it's might be chapter 26, towards the end, he has the explanation of the 12 links of dependent origination, also 3 life interpretation. And probably in the Tibetan tradition, through the, I know in the Gelugpa school of Tsongkhapa, which I think inherits the explanation from a Sangha, also 3 life interpretation. Again, the details will differ, but the essential divisions are the same. So for me, that is ground for taking the 3 life interpretation to be authoritative. It's not something that was invented by the Visuddhimagga, but it comes down from very, very early period, probably before the early Buddhist community was divided into different schools in different geographical regions. Okay, so let's go through now what I think we will do before I come to the Abhidhamma explanation that's given here. We're going to look at the Sutta definitions of the 12 factors, because the Abhidhamma explanations get a bit more technical. And so first we'll see a more conventional more empirical, or let us say a more direct phenomenological explanation from the suttas, something we could relate to more directly, then we'll look at the more technical explanation in the Abhidhamma. So here we have another sutta from Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 12, Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 12, sutta number 2, where the Buddha gives an analysis of dependent origination. So first he goes through the formula, then he says, and what is old age and death? So he's going to break this down into two phases. First, we have aging or old age, the aging of various beings and the various orders of beings, growing old, the teeth breaking, the hair turns gray, the skin gets wrinkled, you lose your vitality, the faculties become weaker, eyesight, hearing, taste less acute. So that is aging. And what is death? The passing away of beings from the various realms or orders of beings, their perishing, breakup, disappearance, mortality, death, completing their time, breakup of the aggregates, the laying down of the body, that is death. And I find this especially useful because some of these sort of what I call the modernistic one life interpretations, I say that old age and death and birth have to be understood metaphorically. Birth is the arising of a state of mind. Old age and death is the change and passing away of a state of mind. But if you look at the suttas, you see old age and death are explained in completely transparent biological terms. And similarly for birth, so here we have what is birth, the birth of the various beings into the different orders or realms of beings, their being born, descent, production, manifestation of the aggregates, obtaining these sense bases, that is called birth. Okay, then we have what is existence. Okay, now the sutta explanation is just enumerates the three realms of existence: sense sphere or desire realm existence, form sphere or material realm existence, formless sphere or immaterial realm existence. That is existence. But then one of the oldest Abhidhamma texts, called the Vibhanga, gives us a little more explanation. So it says, what is existence that is conditioned by clinging? Existence is twofold. There's karma existence and rebirth existence. So what is karma existence? We have meritorious volitional formations. Now, we're going to come to fuller explanation of this. So this is basically engaging in wholesome activities that generate good karma. Good karma is called merit. And then we have demeritorious volitional formations. So these are volitional activities that create bad karma, unwholesome karma, which is called demerit. And then we have the imperturbable volitional formations. So these are the volitions involved in the attainment of the imperturbable meditative absorptions. These are the four formless meditative absorptions. If you remember, the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Because in those attainments, the mind is perfectly is equipped with perfect equanimity, so they're called imperturbable. And the volitions in those states are called the imperturbable volitional formations. And so that's the threefold distinction of karma existence. But in general, all karma leading back to new existence is called karma existence. And then rebirth existence, just to keep it simple, because say it's rebirth, it's existence in the sense sphere, existence in the fine material or form sphere, existence in the immaterial or formless sphere. And then we could say one constituent, yeah, maybe we don't have to go into that. Okay, then we have clinging. So what is clinging? So we have four kinds of clinging. So there's clinging to sensual pleasures, clinging to views, to wrong views, clinging to rules and vows. And by vows here, I mean observances. It's a technical term referring to the kinds of practices that were undertaken by ascetics in the time of the Buddha, with the idea that by undertaking these ascetic practices, one can purify the mind and attain liberation. These would be practices like undergoing long fasts, sleeping on beds of thorns, standing for a long time on one leg, living on the branch of a tree. There are various ascetic practices. So clinging to those types of rules and ascetic practices is a type of clinging. And then clinging to a view of self, a doctrine of self. So there are four kinds of clinging, but in Abhidhammic terms, clinging to sensual pleasures is a manifestation or an aspect of greed or craving. And the other three are different forms of views. Yeah, so one kind of view is the idea that I can gain liberation by following these rules and undertaking these ascetic practices. Another view is clinging to any doctrine of self, and then all other views, wrong views, are put into clinging to views. So in Abhidhammic terms, clinging can be reduced to greed and wrong views. Okay, then we have craving, 6 types of craving for visible forms, sounds, odors, tastes, tactile objects, mental phenomena. 6 types of feeling according to the 6 sense bases. 6 kinds of contact at the 6 sense bases. Then we have the 6 sense bases, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind base. Then name, what's called name and form, nama rupa. So first we have what is called name or mentality, our feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention. So these are 5 mental factors that are invariable what's the word that I want? Accompaniments of consciousness, invariable factors associated with consciousness. So all consciousness has some feeling, has some perception, has some volition, has some contact, and some act of attention. So these 5 invariable mental factors are grouped together under the word used here is nama. So we could say mentality. And then we have form, material form. This consists of the 4 primary elements, the earth, water, fire, and air elements, and then the various types of material form derived from the 4 great elements. So we have name and form together, name and form, or mentality, materiality, together called mentality, materiality. Okay, then we have consciousness, 6 classes of consciousness, through the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind consciousness. And then we have here the Sutta explanation of volitional formations. So we have 3 kinds of volitional formations. The volitional formations through the body, volitional formations expressed through speech, verbal formation, and the volitional formations that occur only in the mind without expression through body or speech, called mental volitional formations. So those are the volitional formations. And then we have, again, some elaboration in the Vibhanga of the Abhidhamma. So again, the Vibhanga has meritorious volitional formations, demeritorious, imperturbable volitional formations. Okay, so here's a little bit more elaborate than we went through before. So what is the meritorious volitional formation? So wholesome volition of the sense sphere, and this would be volition that consists in giving, that's generosity. The volitional formations involved in sila, good behavior, and volitional formations consisting in the practice of meditation. So that is volitional formation, the wholesome volition of the sense sphere. Then wholesome volition of the fine material sphere consists only in meditation. Because when you're absorbed in the jhana, that's the volitions involved in the jhana. You're not practicing giving, not undertaking precepts, but the mind is just absorbed in the samadhi, in the deep meditative absorption. So then what is demeritorious volitional formation? So it's unwholesome volitional activities of the sense sphere. So the volitions involved with acts like killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, slandering, angry speech, and so forth. And then the imperturbable volitional formation, this would be the wholesome volition of the immaterial or formless meditative absorptions. Yeah, we already went through body, speech, and mind. And then we have what is ignorance. It's not knowing suffering, not knowing the origin of suffering, not knowing the cessation of suffering, not knowing the way leading to the cessation of suffering. So in other words, it's not knowing the 4 noble truths. And I would say not knowing all of the implications of the 4 noble truths. So ignorance is not like lack of a university education, not knowing particular facts, but it's a kind of blind, mental blindness that obscures the true nature of things from our direct perception, direct realization. We could also say it's not knowing the arising and passing away of things, not knowing impermanence, dukkha, and the non-self nature of things. Okay, so this is the explanation of the 12 factors by way of the suttas, with the little additions from the canonical Abhidhamma. Now we can go back to the comprehensive manual and look at the explanation of these factors and their relationship through the lens of the Abhidharma system. I wonder if at this point, maybe would we want to take like a 5-minute breather?
Thank you, Bhante. Yes, let's do that. Let's come back in. It's
Is that,
4:11. So
excuse
when we
me?
come back at, say, should we come back at 11:05?
Okay,
My number. Yeah.
okay.
Great.
Yeah, or here is 5 point, it would be 5 after 2.
Yeah, 2 for you. Forgive me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
That's great, Bhante. Thank you.
Those of you who have any questions, please use the chat box. Richard will be collating the questions at some point before the end of the program. So thank you. We'll return back at about 5 minutes.
Okay, I think, should we resume?
Yes, Bhante, that would be great.
Okay, is the recording back on?
Yes, Bhante, the recording's been on the whole
Okay,
time. Yeah.
okay. Okay, so now we're going to see how the 12 factors are explained within in the manual of Abhidhamma, which relates these factors to the different like chittas, chaitasikas that are been mentioned earlier in the Abhidhamma. So here we have ignorance. So dependent on ignorance, there are the karmic formations or volitional activities. So here ignorance or avidya is defined as the chaitasika delusion. And according to the Sutta method of explanation, ignorance is non-knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. The Abhidhamma method gives a fuller definition of ignorance, which I find a little bit puzzling anyway. So it has lack of knowledge of the Four Noble Truths, then lack of knowledge of the past before birth, lack of knowledge of the future, the past and the future together, and lack of knowledge of dependent origination itself. But I think from a practical point of view, ignorance would be non-knowledge of the Four Noble Truths and its corollaries, like the 3 marks of impermanence, suffering, non-self, the arising and passing away of things, and so forth. Okay, then karmic formations are the 29 volitions associated with mundane, wholesome, and unwholesome chittas. So what are these 29 volitions? If anybody could enumerate them, they get a gold star on their report card. Let's see if I could do that. Okay, we have 12 unwholesome. Then we have the 8 great wholesome. Then we have the 5 fine material wholesome. and the 4 non-material wholesome. So those are the 29 wholesome volitions. And then we have, we have 12 unwholesome volitions and 17 wholesome volitions. Oh, here they are. 8 great wholesome chittas, 5 fine material sphere, they're collectively called the meritorious volitional formations. The 12 unwholesome volitions are the demeritorious volitional formations, and the volitions in the 4 wholesome immaterial jhanas are called the imperturbable volitional formations. And then the volitional activity within the mind of a living being who still has ignorance generates karma with the power to produce results in the future. And so ignorance is the chief condition for the karmic formations. Ignorance is predominant in the unwholesome activities, but even in the mundane wholesome activities, ignorance is lying latent. So in that way, ignorance, whether it's in the unwholesome or the wholesome activities, ignorance is the condition for the volitional activities. Okay, then dependent on the karmic formations or volitional activities arises consciousness. So the way the Abhidhamma explains this, that is, that the karmic formations, the 29 wholesome and unwholesome volitions, condition the arising of the 32 kinds of resultant consciousness. And to find the 32 kinds of resultant consciousness, one would have to go back to an earlier chapter on the different types of consciousness. We don't really have to be bogged down by these numerical details. The basic principle is that the wholesome and unwholesome volitions condition the arising of consciousness, and they do that in 2 primary ways. First, at the moment of conception or rebirth linking, one especially powerful karmic formation from the past that's been accumulated in the mind stream of the being undergoing rebirth. So this especially powerful karmic formation will generate the rebirth consciousness in the realm appropriate for that karma to mature. So if an unwholesome volition takes over the role of generating rebirth, then it will produce the rebirth consciousness. If it's really heavy, in the hell realm. If it's lighter, in the animal realm or the realm of the ghosts. If it's one of the wholesome karmic formations that's generating rebirth, then it will produce the rebirth consciousness in the human realm or in one of the heavenly realms. If it's one of the jhana consciousnesses that's producing rebirth, it will produce rebirth consciousness in the form realm or fine material realm. And if it's one of the immaterial volitions that's producing rebirth, it'll produce the rebirth consciousness in the immaterial realm. So that's the way volitional activity will generate consciousness on the occasion of rebirth, But then during the course of existence, other volitional formations or karmic formations will produce other resultant types of consciousness during the course of the life process, according to circumstances. Okay, then dependent on consciousness. Yeah, I should mention that we are having a thunderstorm here. Just as a precaution, it just started in case the power goes out. I hope it doesn't. Okay, so now dependent on consciousness arises nama rupa, name and form. Okay, so whereas in step 2, consciousness refers exclusively to resultant consciousness, here it could signify both resultant consciousness and the karmically active consciousness of previous lives. And here the word nama denotes the mental factors associated with resultant consciousness, and the term matter, material form, signifies the material phenomena produced by karma. Here we don't need these details. But let's take the case of 5 constituent rebirth. This is rebirth in realms in which all 5 aggregates are present: material form, feeling, perception, volitions, and consciousness. So when the rebirth consciousness arises at the moment of rebirth linking, simultaneously there arise the 3 other mental factors of feeling, perception, and the mental formations or volitional formations, along with a particular group of material phenomena. So at the very moment of rebirth, in the case of a human birth, there'll arise the fertilized egg, which is identified as the body, and it has some sexual determination, either male or female, and it will have the base for mental activity, which is called the heart base. It doesn't mean that there's a beating heart there, but it's a subtle kind of matter that serves as the material support for consciousness, and that will evolve into the heart base as the fetus develops. And so here it said that consciousness is the condition for mentality, materiality. Okay, now dependent on mentality and materiality arise the 6 sense bases. So of the 6 sense bases, the first 5 bases, that is the sensitive matter of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, and the mind base here signifies the 32 kinds of resultant consciousness. We don't have to enumerate the 32 kinds, but we could say simply the mind base is resultant consciousness, which is here being determined or conditioned by mentality, materiality. Okay, so as the organism starts to take shape, the 5 sense organs emerge, and these are types of karma-born matter. They arise through the influence of karma. So as the fetus is developing, initially there's just the one-celled organism, which is considered the body base, but as it develops, then the eye, ear, nose, and tongue start to take shape until all 5 sense organs are present, even in a rudimentary form. And then the mental factors that constitute mind or mentality, when they arise, they condition the arising of the mind base, which is a kind of resultant consciousness. And so we could say that resultant consciousness conditions nama or mentality, and then mentality conditions the resultant consciousness, which is called the mind base or manayatana. And so consciousness and nama, mentality, are related as mutual conditions. Each is a condition for the other. So in the sense sphere plane of existence, we have all 6 sense bases. In the fine material plane, there's no nose or tongue base. And so there's only the eye, ear, there's no nose, tongue, and sensitive body. And so there's only the eye, ear, and mind bases. And in the immaterial plane, there's no physical organism at all. So it's just that the mentality is conditioning the mind base. So we have nama pachaya manayatana. But don't be worried about don't be too concerned about these technical details. Okay, then dependent on the 6, now we have the 6 sense bases. So now dependent on the 6 sense bases arises contact. So what is contact? Contact is the coming together, the union of consciousness with its and its mental factors with an object through one or another of the 6 sense bases. So let us say in the case of visual perception, we have contact arising at the eye base through the sensitive eye, and that is called eye contact. And it marks the coming together of the eye base, a visible form, and eye consciousness. Or we could say that eye consciousness meets the visible form through the eye as its channel. And similarly in regard to the other kinds of physical contact. So at the ear base encounters a sound through the ear. Ear consciousness encounters a sound through the ear base. And then with purely internal cognition, the mind consciousness encounters mental objects through the mind base. And so since contact can occur only when these sense bases exist, it's said that contact is dependent on the 6 sense bases. Okay, whenever contact occurs, then feeling arises conditioned by that contact. So the consciousness contacts the object through the sense faculty, and with that contact, some feeling arises. And what is meant by feeling here, it's not emotion as such, but it's a particular felt tone of the experience. The feeling of being either pleasant, painful, or neutral. And this can occur at the 6 bases. And so we have feeling born of eye contact, feeling born of ear contact, and so forth, down to feeling born of mind contact. So 6 kinds of contact, 6 kinds of feeling, and the feeling is either pleasant, painful, or neutral. Then when feeling arises, it can condition the arising of craving. It isn't the case that feeling necessarily gives rise to craving, because if we use mindfulness and right effort and clear comprehension, when feeling arises, we can train the mind to prevent the arising of craving. But as long as ignorance is sitting on its throne, controlling the process, then normally feeling will condition the arising of craving. And so we have 6 kinds of craving distinguished by the object: craving for form, sounds, odors, tastes, tactile objects, and mental objects. And then these can become threefold according to whether it's simply craving for sensual pleasures or craving associated with an eternalist view, which is called craving for existence, or craving associated with an annihilationist view called craving for annihilation. And according to the Abhidhamma system, craving is ultimately identified with the mental factor of lobha or greed. Okay, then going further. Okay, dependent on craving arises clinging. This is upadana. And as we showed earlier when we looked at the Sutta on dependent origination, there are 4 kinds of clinging. Clinging to sense pleasures, to views, to the clinging to rules and observances, and clinging to the view of a self. So clinging to sense pleasures is intensified craving or a form of greed, and the other 3 kinds of clinging are just variations in the mental factor of wrong view. And so each of these types of clinging is conditioned by craving. So we could say that weak, or the initial greed, is called craving, while the intensified greed or view is called clinging. Okay, then dependent on clinging, there arises existence. And as I explained earlier, there's 2 kinds of existence. One is called karma existence, which is the karmically active process of existence, the side of our life, the occasions of our life when we are engaged in various activities that generate volition and that create karma. And then the other aspect of existence is the resultant phase of existence, the passive phase in which we are experiencing or undergoing the ripening, the results of our karma. And so the 2 actually alternate at extreme speed in the course of our life. They just it's like the electric current in a, what is it called? AC, alternating current, going back and forth, or in a fluorescent light, going back and forth, so quickly that one split second we're creating karma, the next split second we're experiencing the result of karma. Okay, so clinging is a condition for the active side of existence, because under the influence of clinging, we engage in activities that bring the accumulation of karma. And clinging is also a condition for resultant existence, because clinging leads us back into the round of rebirth in some state of existence determined by our karma. Okay, then dependent on existence, there occurs birth. And so here birth means the arising of let's put it very simply. Birth is the arising of the set of 5 aggregates that constitute the very beginning of a new existence. And in Abhidhamma terms, this would be the arising of a particular resultant citta with its associated mental factors and the karmic born matter that occurs at the moment of rebirth linking. So dependent on existence, there is birth. So this means that the karmic activities, the karmic phase of existence in the previous life generates the karma that brings about birth into a new existence. So the essential condition for the occurrence of a future birth is the wholesome and unwholesome karma, that is the present karmically active existence. And then dependent on birth, once birth occurs, then inevitably there follows decay and death, old age and death, and all of the other kinds of suffering that we find within our lives: sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So all of this suffering is rooted in birth, and birth is the principal condition. Okay, I think I should go through the analysis first, then we'll take the questions. Because if I take questions now, it could be that the questions will already be answered when we come to the analysis. So these are sort of the tools of analysis that the Theravadan Abhidhamma uses to explain the series of 12 factors in dependent origination. So we have 3 periods of time, the 12 links or factors, and this is very important, the 20 modes, the 3 links or connections, 4 groups, 3 rounds, and 2 roots. Sounds like a lot to take in, but it'll become intelligible. Okay, so now the 3 periods, and when I say this, we have to be very cautious in how we understand this. Okay, so we say ignorance and the karmic formations belong to the past. Birth and decay and death belong to the future. And then the middle 8 factors belong to the present. So that is how the 12 factors are divided into the 3 periods of time. But in the comment here, we make a very important point. We say that when the 12 factors are divided into the 3 periods of time, this should be seen as a mere expository device for demonstrating the causal structure of the round of existence. It shouldn't be taken to mean that, say, ignorance and karmic formations belong to the past. So now in the present, I'm free of ignorance and karmic formations. And certainly it doesn't mean that old age and death will occur only in a future life. And this life, I don't have to grow old and die. No, don't interpret it that way. But as I say, the 12 factors are always present together. Whoops. The 12 factors are always present in any single life, and they sort of are interwoven and penetrate each other in a variety of ways, as we'll see. Okay, then we have the 12 factors. We've already gone through those. And then this is the very important section called the 4 groups. So if we don't take the 4 groups, then one is going to misunderstand, misinterpret the 12 factors of dependent origination. Okay, so it said, by taking ignorance and karmic formations, craving, clinging, and existence are also involved. So in the 12 factors, when it mentions ignorance and karmic formations in the past, we should also understand craving, clinging, and karmic existence also pertained to the past. Again, when it says craving, clinging, and existence belong to the present, we have to understand ignorance and karmic formations also belong to the present. And then when it says birth and old age and death belong to the future, then we have to understand consciousness, name and form, the 6 sense bases, contact and feeling also belong to the future, and also that birth and old age and death also belong to the present. And so a verse says that there are 5 causes belonging to the past, 5 effects belonging to the present, 5 causes belonging to the present, and 5 effects belonging to the future. And so we have 5 4 times, so those are the 20 modes. And then we have some explanation of this. So when ignorance remains even latently in the mind, then craving and clinging are bound to arise. And whenever craving and clinging occur, they are rooted in and accompanied by ignorance. And so they go together inseparably. And then the terms karmic formations and ignorance are both referring basically to the same thing, to karmically active volition. And so when one set of terms is mentioned, the other is implied. And when the other is mentioned, the former is implied. Birth and death are not mentioned separately, but in place of birth and death, what actually undergoes birth and death is consciousness with name, with nama rupa, with mentality, materiality. And so in this way, we have 5 causes belonging to the past, that is ignorance, volitional formations, craving, clinging, and karmically creative existence. 5 effects belonging to the present, consciousness, mentality, materiality, the 6 sense bases, contact and feeling. 5 causes belonging to the present, craving, clinging, karmically causative existence, ignorance, and volitional formations, and 5 effects belonging to the future, that will be future consciousness, mentality, materiality, the 6 sense bases, contact, and feeling. So those are the 20 modes. Then and these 20 modes form the 4 groups. And between the 4 groups, we have 3 connections. And I think I should have a table here. And we could see the connections. Yeah, actually the table is very helpful. We see the 3 connections. First is the connection between past causes and the present results. So it's the link, especially between the formations and consciousness. Then the second link is between present results and present causes. So that's especially the link between feeling and craving. And then the third link is the link between present causes and future effects. So that's the link especially between karmic existence and birth. Yeah, so the three connections or three links are mentioned here. Okay, then the next, this is also very important, is called the 3 rounds. So we have 1 round is the round of defilements. So we take the 12 factors of dependent origination and we look them over and we try to inquire which of these factors are defilements. And when we go through them, we could see the 3 factors that represent defilements are ignorance, craving, which is greed, lust, attachment, and clinging, which is also greed together with wrong views. So those are defilements. Then the second round is the round of karma. And so what belongs to the round of karma? So we have the part of existence called karmic existence, and then the volitional formations or karmic formations. Those two go into the round of karma. So 2 factors in the round of karma. And then the third is the round of results. And what belongs to the round of results? All of the other factors. So we have consciousness, name and form, or mentality materiality, the 6 sense bases, contact, feeling, rebirth, resultant existence, birth, and old age and death. Those go into the round of results. And so we could see through these 3 rounds, we could see and we can discover the cyclic pattern of samsara. So we have the most fundamental round. That's the round of defilements. And then when our minds are overcome by ignorance and craving, then we engage in various unwholesome activities and worldly or mundane wholesome activities. And that is the round of karma. So that's the round of karma. And then when that karma matures, it ripens and it brings its results. And that is the round of results. And then what normally happens in response to these results, that is pleasant and painful results from our own karma, a person who is overcome by ignorance and driven by craving will try to enjoy more pleasure and cling to the pleasures that he or she has and tries to avoid painful experiences. And so in this way, the round of results generates more defilements. And so we have the 3-fold round turns over and over until the ignorance, which is the most fundamental root, is removed by the wisdom of insight and the supramundane paths. And then we have the 2 roots. The 2 roots are ignorance and craving. So it's said that ignorance is the root from the past extending into the present and craving is the route from the present extending into the future. But that has to be understood with a little bit of a qualification, since ignorance doesn't come to an end in the present, but ignorance, actually both ignorance and craving run together through the whole, through all three periods of time. But just when you lay out the 12 factors in this particular series, then you have ignorance from the past into the present, and you have craving from the present into the future. But actually, we should see ignorance and craving together running through the whole process. I think maybe this should do for our overview of dependent origination. And now we could devote some time to questions.
Thank you, Bhante. There are a lot of questions, I'm afraid. But we'll see how many we can get through before we break at midday or your 3 o'clock. So the first question is just about the relationship between dependent origination and what in modern language we would call physical law. It appears that this is a sequential model of causation, yet the analysis is showing it's not. It's a non-sequential, which may be where the idea of interdependent origination comes from, because some of this analysis is clearly in parallel. So I just wondered if you could comment a little bit on how you might understand that in terms of the causal model that's being used here.
Yeah. Okay, I said that, I think I kept on saying that when the 12 factors are laid out in this particular sequence, we have to take it with a lot of qualifications. That the way my understanding, this particular series of 12 factors is laid out in this way. I actually underlined the expression I used. I think I said it should be understood as a mere expository device to exhibit the causal structure of the round of existence. But it shouldn't be taken to mean that the factors assigned to one time period operate only in that period and not on other occasions. But I say that they're mutually intertwined and interpenetrating, as we see, we just saw in section number 7, where we have the 5 causes in the past with, actually it's easier to see. Yeah, so we have these 5 causes in the past, and these are sort of alternating with the results that come. The causes alternate with the effects, and the effects generate more causes, and so on. So it's very intricately interwoven. And this layout of 12 factors is a simplification, even an oversimplification, so we could get some idea of basically of what we have to do to break the cycle of repeated birth and death. And that is to, at one level, to overcome craving and clinging. And then when we're looking for the ground of craving and clinging, we have to jump back to ignorance, the ignorance that's present now, not in the earlier life.
I mean, so would it be correct to suggest that possibly the way it runs through is sequential, but the way one analyzes it is a bit codependent? It's as if certain things work together.
Yeah, maybe we could say that the sequence is a matter of convenience, because say if the Buddha was going to try to explain all of the intricacies, I think he'd never get finished.
Right.
He'd start
Okay.
like one discourse and be going on till, I don't know, without any sleep for 3 or 4 days later, and say, if the monks come, Bhante, you have to take a rest and get some sleep. They'll have to say, I'm not finished yet. Next month we'll stop.
And then Bhante, in terms of the origin of this insight of the Buddha, what is the specific difference between Buddhist independent origination and the Hindu caste system? Because both have the same idea of karma causing rebirth. So clearly there must be a significant difference, but it's just, I just want you to be clear, make it clear what it is.
I think certainly in both Hinduism and Buddhism, the particular conditions under which we are born or reborn is a reflection of our past karma. What the Hindu caste system says is that first it says that, or it holds that the caste system with the 4 primary castes and then countless subcastes is sort of established by divine decree. It's the decree of Brahma, the creator God. It's fixed and determined. And then when you get reborn into a particular caste, pretty much that caste status determines one's responsibilities or duties in life, one's limitations. It's a reflection of one's moral worth, one's capacity for spiritual attainment and realization. Whereas in Buddhism, it would be said that one's state of rebirth reflects one's past karma. But first, the caste system of India, Buddhism, in fact, the Buddha says it's not a divine creation, but it's a social construction. And so it's not inevitable or necessary. But the Buddha gives an explanation of how it originally arose as a matter of sort of convenient social organization, which got out of hand and then became petrified and crystallized into unalterable classes of people. And then in Buddhism, one's caste or caste status doesn't indicate anything about one's moral or spiritual capacities. Somebody who's born into the Brahmin caste can be morally, he might be reborn there because of good karma from the past, but they could have strong defilements and severe, say, moral corruption. Whereas somebody born into a lower caste might have the potential to, to reach the highest stages of moral and spiritual development. In fact, there's a beautiful story. I won't go into the details. It comes in the Therigatha. It's the story of, what's his name? I'll just make the name up. Sobhita. He was born, Sunita. He was born into the caste of the outcast. He was an outcast whose job was to sort of to collect the garbage that was discarded every day. But he met the Buddha and became a monk under the Buddha, and he achieved arhatship through his practice. And after achieving arhatship, he's sitting out in the open air on a full moon night, and the king of the gods, Shakra, comes down in front of Sunita and worships him. And then Mahabrahma, who for the Brahmins is supposed to be the creator of the caste system, Mahabrahma comes down in front of Sunita and worships him, because Sunita, by becoming an arhat, is superior even to Mahabrahma. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. That's very helpful. Are there other words for clinging and craving? They're very old-fashioned words. One doesn't talk about clinging and craving very much. It's not as if craving. I mean, what other word might one use there? Because I think sometimes they...
Well, I must be a very old-fashioned monk.
I think we're used to them, that's the point. I mean, could clinging be seeking meaning? Is it like the meaning of things?
I don't think so, because seeking meaning is a good quality, but clinging, let's say attachment, holding firmly.
Okay.
Craving, I think craving is so well established as a kind of Buddhist term. Earlier translators used to use desire, but the problem with desire is that in Buddhism, there are good desires and unwholesome desires. So it's misleading. And then when you say you have to abandon desire, then, well, do I have to give up a desire to be a good person? Do I have to give up the desire to practice meditation, give up the desire to do wholesome deeds? And certainly not. But what has to be given up is this, I call it a blind, self-centered desire. That's the way I would gloss craving.
I'd
But
say
to me, it's not an old-fashioned word.
because someone's asked this question, you see, that they've said, I find myself craving and clinging to the truth of these teachings. So would it be correct? I mean, could you cling to the truth of the teachings and crave the teachings? Would that be appropriate?
I really think you could cling to the teachings, but the Buddha says, in fact, there's a sutta, he says that the teaching, the Dhamma, is like a raft for crossing the stream. It's to be made use of and not to cling to it. And so there can be clinging even to the Dhamma, but to practice properly, one has to use it without clinging to it.
Right. And how, I mean, could you give a sentence in which the word craving is used? I mean, I've never heard anyone use the term craving except in Buddhist literature.
Oh, really?
Yeah. What would you say to someone? I crave your
Okay.
company. It's very old fashioned. I mean, what do you mean by it? It's like,
Okay, on a hot summer day,
yeah.
I have a craving for a cool lemonade.
Okay. And that would be a bad thing?
Well, actually, it's not so bad on
Yeah.
I don't know.
Bounty, forgive me. I just trying to get.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on. Does meritorious action only result in a good rebirth? What is the merit that leads to nirvana, as in the two accumulations of merit and wisdom?
Yeah, actually, meritorious deeds are essential for all desirable results, all desirable achievements. So merit will one of the results of merit would be a good rebirth, but merit will also be a supporting condition for success and good fortune in the course of this life. So it's said that the reason why, sometimes I have to put question marks around this, why people become wealthy, powerful, influential, popular, beautiful, handsome, and so forth, that is a fruit or result of their meritorious deeds from the past. And then merits are also essential for any of the world transcending attainments, whether achievement of arhatship, the status of a pratyeka Buddha, or the attainment of full Buddhahood. All of them is said that you need the two accumulations of merits and wisdom. Yeah, so merits are always essential for desirable achievements.
Thank you, Bhante. Could you elaborate on the relationship between names and consciousness?
Yeah, when I use the word namarupa and render it name and form, as I said, let me see where I put that in. Yeah, maybe I didn't put that in. That's a very literal translation, name and form. But nama is not a name the way James might be a name, or the way Susan might be a name, or even the way cup might be a name. But what is meant by nama, it seems that here the Buddha has taken over an old Brahminic term from the Vedic literature and sort of absorbed it into his teaching, but he gives it a different meaning, so that nama is the set of essential mental factors that always go along with consciousness. So So here I say the term, this is the translation used in this book for nama, is mind, denotes the mental factors always associated with consciousness. And those factors are feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention. Or we could say the three mental aggregates of feeling, perception, and mental formations. They always go along with consciousness. So don't take nama, though I use name and form, don't take it literally to be name, but take it to be the mental aggregates that assist consciousness in the act of knowing and understanding an object.
Thank you, Bhante. Then there seem to be two places in the 12 links where birth occurs. One is between volitional formations and consciousness.
Yeah.
The second one's between becoming and birth. And this question is about becoming and birth, but obviously it relates to the first.
Yeah.
It says, you stated that birth, old age, and death are to be understood physically. To get more clarity about birth arising from clinging, in terms of Abhidhamma, what does clinging mean in reference to birth? Until recently, intercourse was involved in the process leading to birth. Is that what clinging refers to here? It's as if there's two kind of places where there might be clinging.
You mean clinging in the sexual relation of the man
Yes.
and the woman?
Normally in the Tibetan system, becoming is a couple making love. That's what you see in the Tibetan, in the Wheel of Life, for example. You see that in the 10th link. Yeah. It's interesting. It's an interesting question. Maybe it's a bit complicated.
Yeah, I think there it's not talking about the relations between the man and the woman as the clinging, but it's trying to explain what is it that moves the stream of consciousness of the person who is passing away. What is it that propels or drives that consciousness, stream of consciousness, into a new existence that will begin with the moment of rebirth. And so from one angle, what drives that consciousness, stream of consciousness on is clinging. Well, let me try to put it this way. As long as we're alive, as this physical body is full of vitality and functioning normally, then the stream of consciousness functions on the basis of this physical body. The physical body is the support for the stream of consciousness, and the consciousness is always occurring by way of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, or thinking, except when we go into deep sleep. But then we wake up and then the consciousness is still functioning on the basis of this physical body. Okay, now as death takes place, the body is getting weaker, more and more debilitated, so that the consciousness can no longer function on the basis of this physical body. Okay, then death takes place. The body loses the life faculty is cut off. And so the body can't function as a support for consciousness anymore. But the consciousness is still not, it still has ignorance and craving. And so it wants to go on existing. And so it's clinging to a physical support, sort of looking for a physical support. And then it finds a new organism that is providing the appropriate karmic conditions for it to continue. And then it latches on to that new organism, say the fertilized egg or the embryo that's formed in a woman's womb, and it grasps onto that embryo, and then rebirth takes place. And so it's that clinging to existence that causes the stream of consciousness to grasp hold of a new physical support and thereby initiate the rebirth that will turn into a full a new lifespan.
Thank you, Bhante. That's very helpful. And then there's a related question. We'll have to stop here, I think, because we're
Yeah.
after David. How does the mental consciousness memorize or cognize a long past object that one has experienced? Can dependent origination explain the cause and effect of the past object in the present recalling?
One might be able to work it out theoretically, but I've never seen any attempt in the text to explain how through dependent origination one can account for the recollection of an object long past. Maybe if he's thinking of, how one can recall objects from one life to the next, probably what I would say is that a past experience leaves a subtle impression on the stream of consciousness, which then through the appropriate a stimulus accounted at a later time, evokes that impression, brings it back to memory. Yeah, but that's my own explanation. I haven't seen an account in the texts themselves.
Thank you, Bhante. Let's stop here because we're overrunning, but there are another 11 questions. Forgive me, it's obviously dependent origination.
Maybe if you save that chat, maybe tomorrow, if we have time, we
could deal with it. Yes, that's fine, Bhante. Absolutely.
Thank you all so much, Bhante, for your time. And we will see all of you back here again tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Yeah. I should mention one thing. Okay. I'm not going to do the treatment of the second section of this chapter as it's laid out here in the comprehensive manual, because I find it so complicated and difficult to understand in this text. What I'm going to do is simply give an explanation of the 24 conditions and maybe give some illustrations of how they could be applied to understand dependent origination. And that will be enough.
Thank you, Bhante. We will see all of you again tomorrow at 10 o'clock. That's Pacific Standard Time. That would be 1 p.m. East Coast time. Same link, and we're happy to send out the link again. This is being recorded. It is also being shared on Facebook Live today, so our friends on Facebook can participate. But we will be sending out the recording in about a week from now together, part 1 and part 2. Thank you again, Bhante, and to all of you for joining us today. Thank you. See you tomorrow.